You're welcome to this course on questionnaire, developing standard questionnaire, or the development and standardization of questionnaire. I'm your host, Dio Dukoya, and this is the third module in which I'm going to be showing you the techniques of developing a questionnaire. It's an overview. We have gone through the introduction. We have gone through some of the background, I've given you the overview of questionnaire development. So in this particular lesson, you should be able to develop the content of a questionnaire. You will understand the rudiments and contents of a typical questionnaire, be it for research purpose, or maybe you want to use it for market survey for your company or organization, or even for your family or your own personal business. Whatever is your motive or objective, you should be able to learn the basic or the rudiments of developing questionnaire. This is just a summary you're seeing on this particular slide, the basic steps in developing a questionnaire. The very first step, as you can see here, has to do with the very first step has to do, let me quickly just pick a pen that I can use to give illustration. So this is the very first step here. Please permit me to move back a little bit so that you can see the overview again. The very first step, like I said, step number one is the purpose. You need to establish the purpose and give it a title. That purpose will also now give you a clue on how to give it a title. It's always very good to give your questionnaire a title. This is very important. It's like naming a child. Your questionnaire is like a brainchild, and you need to give it a name that gives a kind of summary of what that questionnaire is all about, especially when people want to begin to respond to it. They want to know what is it about. So the title will give them an idea. But it's not all the time you reflect the actual title of a questionnaire, especially when the purpose of the questionnaire is a little bit negative, or the construct you want to measure is not something people may not be too comfortable with the construct, like you want to measure people's level of depression, people's level of dishonesty, all those negative traits like that. You couch them, you can't make them so apparent, or else people will put on a kind of defense mechanism. So you've got to be careful. But if the purpose is positive, why not? You can use it directly. And there's nothing wrong at times linking your name with it. We have so many other instruments like that developed over the years that the authors put their names, Wechsler Intelligence Scale, and so on, iSync, Personality Inventory, and so on and so forth. So you can also put your name, once it's your brain chart, to link it, since it's a kind of legacy you're leaving to the world, you're living for the world. Then number two step is the literature. You need to also learn to conduct, when you want to develop a questionnaire, the next logical step, when you have decided your purpose and the title and the focus or the construct you want the questionnaire to measure, then you need to embark on literature review and determination of the construct. And the purpose of that literature review is to be able to determine, to get the indicators on the construct. When I say indicators, symptoms or major characteristics of that construct, like intelligence. What are the constructs? What are the indicators of intelligence? Ability to articulate, ability to calculate, ability to speak, ability to process words, ability to process numbers, ability to solve simple, basic, common day-to-day problems. Those are indicators. I'm just giving an example. If I'm an entrepreneur, for instance, what are indicators? And some of the indicators are ability to sell and make profit, ability to manage people, ability to raise fund and capital. Those are indicators of that a good entrepreneur. So every construct, you have indicators like that established in theory through scientific research. We are not talking about armchair speculation. So you need to engage in literature review to be able to dig out those indicators. And that is very important, because that's why in academia, we always insist that you must give us the international acceptable theory that your questionnaire or instrument is based on, because that is what gives us that's what gives credibility to your questionnaire. We don't want something you just sit down and engage in armchair speculation, and the first idea that comes to your mind, you now begin to put it into the questionnaire. No, that is not acceptable. There's no way that work can be acceptable. It would be solid or valid that way. Your questionnaire is a scientific instrument, and it must be developed, follow principles and tenets of scientific investigation. That's very important for us. And then the next thing after that is to engage and to give an introduction to your work. So on the basis of all this, you now introduce your work in the questionnaire. So this literature review is a silent work that is not expressed. It's expressed in your work, quite right, but you don't put a section on literature review into your questionnaire, but it gives you information, a lot of information you're going to use within your questionnaire. That's why I just decided to put that stage here. It's not as if it's a component you are going to express within the questionnaire, but it's going to give you a lot of information, especially the construct is going to now determine the sections you're going to have, those major constructs, those major domains you discover from literature, from the theory surrounding that construct. It will give you indicators. Like in personality now, there are five major domains popular, according to the Big Five theory, which is acronym with ocean. We have openness, we have conscientiousness, we have extroversion, we have agreeableness, and then we have neuroticism. So all those 5 sections, you can in your questionnaire, we expect you to now have 5 sessions addressing those 5 domains with a minimum of between 3 to 5 questions probing into those domains, probing you with questions that will now elicit response that will help us to determine the degree of presence of those different domains in your personality. That's just giving an example using personality tests. I hope you get that. You can go over this video again and again to really get, because you may not listen to me. Listening to me once, you may not really get all the points. That's the essence of the recorded version like this. Is beauty of it is that you can go over it again and again. Take your time to listen to me again and again until you get the point very clearly. Questionnaire development appears to be very simple, but it's a little bit technical, and you need repeated practice to get used to it, to do it right. So, and this literature review section is one of the things that help you to really get it right. And you can't be afford to be lazy about it or gloss over it or push it aside and just, because that's the challenge we have with so many people. They want shortcuts. They don't want to do the right thing. And so the first idea that comes to their mind, they just begin to put some paper and begin to slap you with some questions. But then you see the questionnaire, you just discuss it. It's a lot of jumble. Garbage as it were. And it gives, the information it gives you will be garbage as it were. And then by the time you crunch that into the statistics, it becomes garbage in, garbage out. And that is what actually begins to affect the spirit of development, in most countries and in most settings. So we need to avoid that practice. So, and now next to that, in your instrument, after declaring the title, then you need to have a kind of introductory section where you give a summary of your work. I'm still going to talk more a little bit about this. Then, but I'm already almost summarizing the old lesson there, but that repetition is not bad anyway. So even if I give a kind of overview here, as we go into details again, I will still be repeating some of these details as we go further in this particular lecture. So the introductory section is the next thing that gives an overview of what the instrument is all about. And there are other components like consent and other details you can inject, and then particularly appealing to their conscience so I can respond, sincerely. That is what the essence of that introduction. And then after that, you have the biodata section, and then the instructions, and then the sections. Biodata is addressing your demographic data, as it were. And then all those ones we follow in that order. And then you decide on your response format. I'm going to talk more about that as we go into this lecture. The response format you want, is it yes or no, or is it a 5-point Likert scale? And then when you decide on all that, you now begin to write your questions, which become item writing. Begin to, based on the domains you have, and then the description of the construct you have discovered from the literature based on solid theory. On the basis of that information, you now begin to write the items, the questions. And the questions will be phrased in such a way that we agree with your response format. If it's yes or no, your question should be toned towards yes or no response. If it's strongly agree, disagree, 5-point Likert response, your question, the way you phrase the question should also agree with that response format. Those are some of the technicalities. And then you have positive questions, you have negative questions. That will also determine the way you code or score the responses. When you have the way you code or score a positive statement, it will be different from the way you score a negative statement. And that will also be differentiated in the way you code, you give scores to the responses, which is what we call coding. And then, of course, and that will now take you to content and face validity. And then thereafter, so you will now go ahead to do a pilot test to be able to establish your reliability and validity, which is different, of course, to content and face validity. The real reliability and validity is more solid exercise. It's far deeper than the content and face validity. This is another set of validity, especially construct validity and criterion-related validity. Those are the validities you establish, and then reliability. When you are done with that, it is until you have established the reliability and validity of the instrument. That is when your work in developing your questionnaire will be complete. Because if your questionnaire is not valid or reliable, it will be dangerous to use it. In fact, psychometrically, it will be a violation of human right if you go ahead to use it, and somebody can be sued because some of the decisions made on the basis of these questionnaire responses, they are sensitive. At times they use it for promotion, at times they use it to determine the state of well-being, mental health of people. So if your instrument is not valid, it can send erroneous information to people making decisions. They use some of this information even in law court. So, and that's more reason why we cannot afford to do it anyhow. Whether we are doing it for research purpose or in industry or in the hospital setting, we just must do it right in following these basic processes of developing questionnaire. What we simply call questionnaire actually is very versatile and wide. It's the same thing as all those various instruments you use to collect information or data, and they have various names in various places. And that is what it is. So that's just an overview of what we are going into. Now, talking about purpose. So it is very important you ascertain the purpose of the psychological instrument, in this case, the questionnaire that you want to develop. What construct or variable do you want to measure? That is the essence, that's the purpose. And the purpose will determine every other thing within that instrument. Your purpose will be making, even part of the purpose is, do you want to, the survey you want to conduct, is it to ascertain the mental health of the person, or is it to conduct a survey, or is it to know the state or the mindset of your customers, or is it to know the opinion of people about some political ideologies, and so on and so forth. So those are the purposes. The purpose will now determine the kind of construct we're going to measure and how you're going to measure it. That's why it is very important to clearly delineate the purpose for which you are developing the questionnaire. It becomes the compass to guide the direction of development of the instrument. And then the purpose will also guide you in crafting the title for the questionnaire. And so the purpose is often reflected in the title, though in some cases, like I've said earlier, you may have to deliberately hide the purpose and in not reflecting it in the title, if especially the purpose is negative. Like I've said before, you want to ascertain the level of neuroticism of somebody that is or depression or suicide tendency. Those kind of things, you can make it so visible, because the moment you do that, then people will put up a kind of defense mechanism that will not allow them to open up properly. And that is why you may have to be careful about going through that route. So you craft the purpose carefully. I've discussed again about literature review before. You need to embark on ample literature review for deeper understanding of the concept or construct that you want to measure. And then particularly to identify the underlying theories. This understanding is vital to the establishment of content validity for your questionnaire. In fact, when the experts, subject experts and psychometric experts want to assess the content validity of your questionnaire, which is a vital requirement in developing any questionnaire, you need to give it to some experts. One of the things they're going to be checking for is the theory your work is based on. If you cannot give them a solid theory that is acceptable internationally, that already become a deficiency for your work. There's no way your work will have ample content validity if it's not established on if it's not based on an established theory based on that construct. For instance, let me just give you an illustration. There was a time I was going to develop the entrepreneurial effectiveness scale. My field is psychology. I'm not an entrepreneur per se. I have to go and study and read all the theories of entrepreneurship, and until I stumble on the best gurus in that particular field, acceptable to those professionals in that field. Because when I got their theory, I read it, and from their theory, I began to glean all the major domains of what makes for effective entrepreneurs from their theory, which they have proven through experiments over the years. So I now based my instrument on those domains. They even gave me descriptions of those domains, which now gives me an idea of the kind of questions I'm to raise to assess those domains. And that's what makes that instrument effective. I presented that paper, that particular report on that instrument at Thailand, a few years ago. So nobody can fault it. Even people from that field who understand the field can fault it, because it has been based on a theory that they all know and they all respect and accept. That is the way to go. That's the essence of the literature review. We cannot overclock this point. And this is what determines content validity. And don't forget, I've told you before, content validity is the mother of all validities. Once the instrument lacks content validity, it will lack, there's no way any other validity or reliability information will be meaningful. It's the basis. The content must just align with acceptable theories in that field. That is the essence of this. And of course, it's what also guides the items, the way you're going to write, the questions, the way you're going to write it, and the various sections of domains within that questionnaire. So this part is very, very important and is germane. So we need to pay attention to it, as it were. Now, the next point here is the literature review. Okay, I'm still talking about literature review anyway, and I've just mentioned the issue of indicators. So you already have an idea of the indicators I'm talking about. I've given you the illustration with the big 5 theory of personality. If I'm going to measure personality, that theory gives us 5 major domains or indicators of personality, which is actually usually used. We use the acronym OCEAN to just describe it. O for openness, C for conscientiousness, and then E for extroversion, A for agreeableness, and then N for neuroticism. So those are the 5 indicators. So under those indicators, you can now begin to come up with your questions. Generate at least, I recommend 3 to 5 questions under each domain. That's what we recommend. So your questions will now be weaved around those indicators, and that makes your work very solid. And then next to that now, once you have established that, you have determined the domains, the next thing is to now begin to prepare your introductory statement, like I've said before. Now, your introductory statement should give respondents a clear idea of the intent or purpose of your instrument. It should also include statements of confidentiality and consent. These are very important. Things like, in most questionnaire, we don't expect people to give their names, or else they will put up defense mechanism, and the responses may be full of response bias. So because of that, as much as possible, you don't indicate. So you let them know that, look, your names are not, because one of the purposes of this introductory statement, because one of the major weaknesses of most questionnaire is the issue of response bias, and people not wanting to give factual response, thinking that maybe people can trace their answers, the responses back to them. So you need to appeal to their conscience from this introductory statement that, look, this information is so vital to help humanity, and your responses will be treated with utmost confidentiality. And you see, nobody is likely to trace this response to you because your name is not requested. Are you getting it? So you put it that way to them. So, and you keep reminding them in the course of their responses. That's why at times it's not good to just drop the question and just go and come back to pick it. I rather prefer that we all sit together and I keep appealing to them as they're responding. That way, I'm more likely to get factual and reliable responses than when you just drop with them and you just go. And even the ones you drop online too, there's a way you can really, really highlight that introductory statement and appeal to them repeatedly. That will make it more useful. So this part you can underplay, because psychologically, that's the major weakness with most psychological instruments. Unlike the instruments in the physical sciences, where they use calibrated instrument. In this case, the human mind you need to appeal to them before you can get very useful, reliable responses. And this is very, very important. Of course, the issue of consent is also there. I need to mention that because in recent times, it's very important you receive the consent of the respondents to use the information either for research purposes. And so you can even make them to sign a particular portion that your responses by responding to this questionnaire. One of the easy ones we use, the statement we use is that by responding to this questionnaire, you have given us consent to use the information for research purposes. And once the person accept and fill the questionnaire, respond, the consent, that statement. In some other cases, some other research, they always use a kind of comprehensive statement that the person will sign. You know, if it's a minor, the parents will sign for the person. So this is not a very light issue because we respect human rights and you don't violate human rights as much as possible. So the issue of consent is very germane when you are preparing your questionnaire. You have to have a section where you have the consent section there. And then part of the introductory statement, again, like I said, I've explained this one already, is that the greatest challenge with instruments of this nature is response bias. You therefore need to use section to appeal to the respondents' conscience, reminding them of the fact that their names are not required, so they should feel free to offer frank responses. You may also need to motivate the parent, the respondent in some cases, because many of them are so busy with so many things. So, and if you don't find a way to motivate them properly, they will just give you useless responses, just marking whatever they like. We have experienced that over the years. So that's why you see international bodies like Survey Monkey and so on and so on, giving as much as $1, $2, $3 to respondents to respond so that they can engage and get factual response from people so that they don't just feel anything. So why not? You can try and do the same, especially if you see that information, you are trying to collect as very important. Why not? You may need to pay for it. You need, for instance, customer opinion to certain products or company. They may need to pay for that to really get factual responses and sincere responses. So you may need to motivate. If it's a research, you can, when you sit them down, you can give them simple drinks and refreshment just to motivate them to get a good response while you're appealing to their conscience. All these things are very important because you are dealing with human beings and their ability to cooperate with you and give factual responses is so critical to getting solid data, or else you may end up with garbage in, garbage out syndrome if you are not careful. That's why you need to take all these portions and sections seriously. It's very, very important. Now, the section on demographic data, like I told you before, you can see that I'm virtually repeating what I've said before, but it's like I said, repetition is very powerful for learning. So it's good I repeat it. Now I'm going a little bit deeper here, of course. And so in this next section, which is the same thing as biodata, some call it demographic data, some call it biodata. Your focus is that you are getting information like the gender, their age. Remember that the name is not there, but you may still need information like gender because you may want to conduct your analysis based on gender. You may also conduct your analysis based on age and based on class and level of the respondents if they are students. And then educational attainment, work experience, religion, those are all the kind of information you may want to use, location, and so on and so forth. Marital status, these are part of the information you may want to include in demographic, depending on the objective of your study. And some of these things are also very useful, even when you want to validate, because that's what I call validation information. You may incorporate it in this section also. For instance, in my the example I gave you about the entrepreneurial effectiveness scale. And one of the indicators that will help me to validate if you're a good entrepreneur, you should be making increasing very good profit annually. And so I had a section there where I asked that they should give me an idea of their annual income over the past 3 years. That information will help me to validate, to establish the validity of the instrument, because if I have a very high score, if high score in my instruments indicating entrepreneur effectiveness, then it should have positive correlation with the level of profit also they are reporting to me. So that becomes a kind of validation question for me, which I can incorporate under the biodata section, or create a separate section for it. I'm just giving you an example. And these are very, very sensitive and very vital information you need to establish the validity of your questionnaire or data collection instrument, in this case, the questionnaire. I hope you are getting it. All these points are very, very, very necessary and powerful, and you need to know how to apply them. You may need to be taken through one practical session of developing a questionnaire to really get it, because you may think that they are very simple until you start doing it actually. But like I said, thank God for the recorded message. You can go over it again and again until you get it right and begin to apply it accordingly. But if you still have any question as we proceed and it's not clear, you can always get across to me. It's my joy to develop professionals who can develop good questionnaire, because these are part of the skills we need to become very astute researchers and people that will contribute to our community and national development. So we need to do it right. We need to get it right. And it's my passion to see that we can develop more professionals along this line. And this cuts across all professions and fields, because we must all know how to conduct research and how to collect reliable data that because our development in any nation or community organization cannot be outside correct measurement and correct collection of reliable and valid data. This is so critical. And of course, like we have now realized, one of the major instruments for achieving that is the use of questionnaire for survey purposes and other data collection exercises. So, like I said again before, we always avoid collection of names, telephone numbers, house addresses as much as possible, so that you can allow the respondents freedom and liberty to respond freely without feeling feeling as if they are under pressure. That is very, very important. And you let them know that you are not collecting that information for that same reason. That's part of what you actually, the statement you put in your introductory section, as it were. Now, the next thing after this, after you've done this, is to, of course, you give the instruction of how they're going to respond to the question. But first of all, you need to determine your response format. And I'm going to devote another lecture on this, because I need to show you the various response formats. But suffice it to say that at this point, as you're developing your questionnaire, you have to determine your response format, because that will also determine the way you phrase the question, So the direction of the research objectives will determine this, of course. For most questionnaires, the Likert scale is often used, of course. But you also discover that an instrument like the MMPI, that is a multiphasic Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory, they use just the dichotomous response format of yes or no. And it's an internationally acceptable instrument that is used in most clinical setting, the Army, and so many other recruitment purposes all over America and all over the world. And they just use yes or no response. ISEC is also yes or no response. So it does not matter. Your purpose is what determines, it's left for you to determine which response format you want, as much as possible. But if you are using the 5-point Likert scale, there are some caveats there and some words of caution that I'm going to give you as we proceed. But just understand that, and I'm still going to give you more ideas of the various response formats you can use. And the response format will also now determine the way you phrase the questions. So you can now see that some of the technicalities in developing questionnaire that is not as so simple as most people just think it. Anybody just sit down and just do whatever they like. That's why we're not getting the kind of response we're supposed to get and the kind of information that will actually lead to development in our various communities, organizations, and and nations, as it were, especially in the developing countries. Still talking about response format, I want you to be very careful about the midpoint word often used in 5-point Likert scale, undecided. I want you to avoid it as much as possible. If you say neither agree nor disagree, that's even better than to say undecided. To me, somebody who's undecided is confused. And the worst part is that at the end of the day, when you are now coding, people now give a code of, a score of 3 to such cases. When somebody is confused, you are giving the person 3. That will almost invalidate the entire work, because don't forget that the whole exercise of questionnaire is to actually you are trying to measure, you are trying to apply numerical value to what I call, verbal information. You are trying to actually measure it and convert them to, you are trying to quantify, qualitative information. That's what you are trying to do. So while doing that, it has to be done intelligently. To award a score of 3 to somebody who is undecided does not make sense to me. It's quite misleading. I prefer that such people, if you want to even use undecided, you put it at the end. Maybe an lot is 0 to that person. It's not decided. You put 0, and then you scale up the others from maybe 1 to 4, depending on, whether the statement is positive again or negative, supporting what you are, and then your decision whether you want high score to depict high presence of the trait you are measuring and low score to depict low presence, which is the common sense way to go actually. And that will now determine the way you phrase the question. Your questionnaire will now be phrased positively. And then if somebody is agreeing to such response, then the score should be high. If somebody is disagreeing to such positive response, the score should be low. Those are some of the logics we use to decide on the coding and then the kind of statements. These things must be done intelligently. It can't just be done haphazardly. You need to understand those rudiments to be able to do it right. And these are part of the points we are trying to raise here. Still talking about response format, we have other value response formats such as checklist, where respondents simply pick the items that apply to them. And then we have rating scales, where respondents use numbers to rate events ability, maybe from 0 to 1. I'm still going to talk more in another presentation on these various response formats. So you're going to see sample. I'm going to show you pictorial illustrations of some of these response formats. I know you are familiar with some of them, but it's good we just go over it again so that you can now decide on which response format we're going to use, because that will determine the way you phrase the question. That will also determine the coding and the way you convert into quantitative, your the responses into quantitative value. So, and then when you determine your response format, it's very good to also give one clear example of how you expect the respondent to respond at the beginning together with your instruction. You give the instruction, you now give one example of how you expect them to respond. You give it at the top. That is always very useful too. And then this one now take us to the next, you now move on from there to the sections, which must have been determined from literature review, the various domains you have discovered from the literature based on established theory. I've given you example of personality based on the Big 5 theory of openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and then neuroticism. Those are 5 major domains. So that will now give me 5 sections. That will be my section. Based, if I'm developing a question on personality, to measure people's personality, I can now decide to base it on those 5 sections and then begin to generate my questions on those 5 sections, as it were. So, but if it's a research you are conducting, you can base your sections on your research questions. If you have 4 research questions, so you can have 4 sections like that, each one addressing each research question. And then you can now have sub-questions under each research question to derive answers to those research questions, to between 3 to 5 questions. So if it's a research, if it's also you are conducting survey to assess customers' opinion on a particular thing, and there are many products, those products can also constitute sections within the instrument. If it's only one product, you can just have one single section. It's not compulsory more than one section if it's just one product. But if the product has various dimensions, maybe in terms of packaging, in terms of taste, you can also now break it into those sections again based on those various domains or the dimensions of that product or service. So it's a matter of creativity. It's a matter of making sure that you address the main issues that which in the objective of that, what you set out to measure. That is what will determine this section domains we are talking about. I also need to mention that in some situations, the sectional titles may simply just be quotes, especially if the purpose or objective is negative and it's not something that is too desirable. So that will now create a kind of defense mechanism for the respondents. So you may decide to use quotes. You may not be using the direct name of those sections. Like even the last section of that example I've been using about personality and neuroticism. So nobody wants to identify with neuroticism that is neurotic. So you may decide to use a special code for that section. We don't use the neuroticism per se. That is part of area you now have to be very sensitive when you are developing your questionnaire, so that you don't begin to put off your respondents and put them on a mode that they will not want to cooperate with you in giving factual responses. So you need to be very careful about that. So once all these are done, then you can now move on to item writing. And in this case, when you are writing your items, you have to obey the item writing rules. There are quite a number of rules, and the core of those rules is avoiding ambiguity. The way you phrase the question should be very simple. It should be very clear. It should be understandable. There should be no point when your respondent begin to ask you, what do you mean? Oh, I don't understand this. The moment they are doing that, it's already puncturing the face validity of your questionnaire. The moment your respondent are beginning to raise questions about not understanding the statement, asking you to clarify some points, asking you, what do you mean? The moment you are having your respondent, that's why you need to do a pilot test. And that's part of what we are checking for in face validity. You know, unlike content validity that experts check, it is the end users that would give you the proof of your face validity. And part of what they do is that they read the items. Is it making sense to them? Do they need to consult you before they understand them? Do they need to consult a material before they can respond to your question? Once you have such questions that they have to start consulting dictionary, consulting a record before they can answer you, it's already puncturing the face validity of your instrument. So be careful about that. Don't put questions that the information or response can only be gotten either from, they have to go and start looking for the meaning of a particular word you use. Like one of my friends in those days when he was campaigning used the word lacuna. In fact, many of us at that time, that was the first time we were hearing that word. You have to go and start picking the dictionary to know the meaning. If you now start put lacuna inside your questionnaire and people don't know the meaning, and they have to start consulting dictionary before they can now understand what you are saying, it's already puncturing the face validity of your questionnaire. So you have to be careful about that. The way you phrase the question, you don't use phrases. And that's the more reason why we advise our students, and especially in the academia, when they want to try to import, because many of them, they're lazy about developing their own questionnaire. So of course, not being lazy, actually, maybe they have not developed enough acumen or skill to develop their own questionnaire. So the one easy option for them is to adopt a foreign questionnaire that have been already established. But the challenge with such foreign questionnaire is that they are usually, there's what we call culture bias. They use phrases and terminologies that are used within that particular culture. So when you now see them importing that to Nigeria, you still see those phrases there, which our people in this part of the world may not understand. And that introduces culture bias. And that introduces, it punctures the face validity of that particular instrument. So an expert needs to check it and be sure that those instruments are free of culture bias. So that's very important, and we avoid. So whichever way, whether you're adopting or adapting somebody's instrument, you need to check and be sure that the statements are free of ambiguity, they're clear, they're short, they're not wordy, they're not woolly, and they ensure that the number of items should not be too excessive, so prevent boredom. You know, because when it's becoming too long these days, people don't want long questionnaires. So you see them just, and then you also avoid double-barrel question. Within the same question, some people has 2-3 questions. When they respond, the response now comes, if it's yes or no. The question now is that yes or no is how will you be able to attribute which of the 3 questions you have loaded into one is meant for? You will not be able to know. So, and it renders that response useless, because you will not be able to attribute it to. That's why we avoid double barrel or triple barrel questions. Each question should be addressing one issue per time. These are some of the things we check when you are writing items. These are part of the rules for writing items. So you need to be very careful. And the topic, whatever you are writing, should address the subtopic, the domain you are addressing. If it's openness, all your questions should be addressing openness. If it's extroversion or being extroverted, all the questions under it should be addressing extroversion, not the other way, not depression. So an expert needs to help you to check the degree of congruence of the questions under each item with the domain you are measuring. These are some technical, in fact, this point I'm raising is what makes the questionnaire very valid. And then you have good data to actually analyze that can lead to development and help the nation and your community and the people and the company you are trying to assist to conduct research for. So we can't, there's no shortcut about this. We just must know how to do it right. And I hope you are beginning to see the importance of going through this kind of course and properly understanding it and applying these rules as you go about it. Next to that, of course, So all items should be self-explanatory with no ambiguity. It should be free also of grammatical errors and technical jargon. So you don't use technical terminologies that you are used to in your field, because you are addressing the layman out there. So you should be conscious of all this. You know, like I said, any prompt requiring consultation of literature or record beyond the reach of the student should also be avoided. I've explained this already. Now, the questions should also be direct, should be simple, such that respondents can fully respond without recourse to the researcher asking you to come and clarify points. I've explained this already. And then, or having to make reference to a saved record or publication. And like I said, this is part of what partly makes for face validity of the questionnaire. I've explained all this already. So in the next lesson, I will show you some of the popular response formats beyond Likert scale that you can use to develop your questionnaire. At the end of this exercise also, I'm still going to show you a typical questionnaire that have been developed, you know, and of course, one of the projects we expect you to do at the end of this course also is that you are going to develop a questionnaire and you are going to submit that. And that's part of what we are going to use to certify you that you have actually mastered the skill of developing a questionnaire. So you begin to prepare yourself. You are still going to develop a questionnaire for yourself. You know, if you're a student, for a research purpose, if you're in a workplace, maybe to assess your customers, to assess your customer concerning your product or service. So begin to prepare yourself, because it's, in fact, it's a very vital requirement for certification in this course. You must develop a standard questionnaire and report the reliability and validity. You're going to apply everything I'm teaching you and report it and prepare a manual for your questionnaire. So that is what we now, but of course, if you don't want the certificate or you just want to gain the knowledge, you are free to move off from after the lecture. But I encourage you, you know, the true learning takes place when you practicalize, not when you just hear alone. You know, true learning is in application. That is where you gain wisdom. And I see you getting there. See you again at the next class, and God bless you.